The sun peeked over the horizon, painting the small town in shades of orange and gold. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves, as 10-year-old Ethan stood by the window, staring outside. His dark hair stuck out at odd angles, from sleep, and his bright eyes sparkled with excitement. Today wasn't just another Sunday, it was church day. For Ethan, church meant two things: donuts after the service and a chance to ask all the questions swirling in his curious mind. His mother, Sarah, bustled around the kitchen, humming softly under her breath. She was a tall woman with gentle features, her hands always busy, whether it was folding laundry or stirring soup. Religion had been a cornerstone of their lives ever since Ethan could remember. Every Sunday without fail, they walked hand in hand to St. Mary's Chapel, a quaint little building nestled among towering oak trees. It wasn't grand like some churches, but its stained glass windows told stories that captivated Ethan every time he stepped inside. "Ethan, hurry up," Sarah called, adjusting the scarf around her neck. "We don't want to be late." "I'm coming," Ethan shouted back, grabbing his jacket off the hook near the door. As they stepped onto the sidewalk, the cool breeze nipped at their cheeks. Ethan skipped ahead, occasionally turning to make sure his mom was still behind him. He loved these walks. They gave him time to think, to wonder about the world beyond their small town. "Mom," Ethan said suddenly, slowing down so he could walk beside her, "do you think God talks to people?" Sarah smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Well, some people believe he does. Why do you ask?" "I don't know," Ethan replied thoughtfully, kicking a pebble along the path. "Pastor Daniel says God answers prayers, but I've never heard him talk." "Do you think he only talks to special people?" Sarah paused for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I think God listens to everyone, Ethan. Maybe he doesn't speak out loud, but sometimes we feel his presence in our hearts." Ethan nodded slowly, though he didn't look entirely convinced. What if he did talk out loud? Like, what if someone actually heard him say something? Sarah chuckled lightly, ruffling her son's hair. That would be quite a story, wouldn't it? As they approached the chapel, Ethan's curiosity seemed to grow stronger. He tugged at his sleeve, nervously, glancing up at the towering steeple. Something about today felt different. He couldn't put his finger on it, but there was an energy in the air that made his stomach flutter. Sarah noticed his restlessness and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You all right, kiddo?" she asked. "Yeah," Ethan murmured, though his voice wavered slightly. "Just thinking." Inside the chapel, the familiar scent of polished wood and candle wax filled the air. Rows of pews stretched toward the altar, where sunlight streamed through the colorful glass windows, casting vibrant patterns on the floor. Ethan slid into his usual spot beside his mom, swinging his legs back and forth as Pastor Daniels began the service. But instead of focusing on the sermon, Ethan found himself staring at the flickering candles, wondering if anyone else had ever felt the way he did right now. Like maybe, just maybe, something extraordinary was about to happen. Pastor Daniels stood at the pulpit, his voice steady and commanding as he began the sermon. The chapel was quiet except for the occasional rustle of fabric or the soft creak of old wooden pews. Ethan sat cross-legged on the seat, leaning forward with wide eyes fixed on the pastor. Today's topic wasn't like the usual lessons about kindness or forgiveness. It was about something deeper, more mysterious. Pastor Daniels spoke of moments when heaven seemed to touch earth, when ordinary people claimed to have encountered divine forces, or even darker ones. Some say they've heard God's voice in whispers, the pastor said, his tone hushed, but intense. Others claim to have seen angels standing beside them in times of need. But remember this: not all answers come from light. Sometimes we must be cautious of what or who we invite into our lives. Ethan tilted his head, furrowing his brow. He didn't fully understand what the pastor meant by darkness, but it sent a shiver down his spine. Sarah noticed her son's reaction and reached over to squeeze his hand reassuringly. She assumed he was just reacting to the dramatic tone of the sermon, but there was an uneasiness gnawing at her too. It wasn't often that Pastor Daniels delved into such cryptic topics, and she couldn't shake the feeling that his words carried more weight than usual. The pastor continued, recounting stories of biblical figures who had faced trials after receiving divine messages. He described how some people reported strange occurrences following their encounters, unexplained noises in their homes, vivid dreams that felt too real, or an overwhelming sense of being watched. As he spoke, Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His legs stopped swinging and his fingers gripped the edge of the pew tightly. Sarah glanced at him again, concerned. "Are you okay?" she whispered, leaning closer. Ethan nodded quickly, though his face looked pale. "I'm fine," he muttered, but his gaze remained glued to Pastor Daniels. Something about the sermon resonated with him in a way he couldn't explain. It was as if the pastor's words weren't just meant for everyone, they were speaking directly to him. When the congregation rose to sing a hymn, Ethan stayed seated, staring blankly ahead. Sarah nudged him gently. "Come on, let's stand up." Reluctantly, he joined her, mouthing the words to the song without really singing. His mind raced with questions. Was it possible for someone to hear God's voice? And if so, how would they know it was him? What if someone else answered instead? By the time the service ended, Ethan seemed distant, lost in thought. Sarah tried to lighten the mood as they filed out of the chapel. "So, what did you think of the sermon?" she asked brightly. "It was weird," Ethan admitted, frowning. "Do you think those things really happen? Like, do people actually see angels?" Sarah hesitated, unsure how to respond. Before she could answer, Ethan spotted a side door leading to a smaller chapel and tugged on her sleeve. "Can I go look at the windows, please?" She glanced toward the exit where other families were chatting and laughing. "Sure, but don't wander off too far. Stay where I can see you." Ethan nodded eagerly and darted away before she could change her mind. Watching him disappear through the doorway, Sarah sighed. She hoped he'd forget about the unsettling sermon once they got home, but deep down, she couldn't ignore the nagging worry that something about today felt off. The side chapel was dimly lit, the only light coming from the colorful stained glass windows that depicted scenes of angels and saints. Ethan stepped inside cautiously, his sneakers making soft squeaks against the polished floor. The air felt cooler here, almost heavy, as if the room itself was holding its breath. He glanced around, taking in the quiet beauty of the space. It was smaller than the main sanctuary, with just a few wooden pews facing a simple altar adorned with flickering candles. As he wandered deeper into the chapel, Ethan noticed an elderly man sitting alone on one of the front pews. His back was slightly hunched, and his hands rested gently on his lap. He wore a dark coat that looked too big for his frail frame, and his silver hair glinted faintly in the candlelight. For a moment, Ethan hesitated, unsure whether he should approach or leave quietly. But something about the man's calm presence drew him closer. "Hello there," the man said suddenly, his voice soft but clear. Ethan froze, surprised. How had the man known he was there? Hi," Ethan replied shyly, stepping forward. "I didn't mean to bother you." The man turned his head slowly, revealing kind eyes that seemed to sparkle with warmth. "You're not bothering me, young one. Come sit." He gestured to the empty space beside him. Ethan hesitated again, but eventually slid onto the pew, keeping a small distance between them. Up close, he could see that the man's face was lined with age, yet there was a strange sense of peace about him. "How did you know I was here?" Ethan asked curiously. The man chuckled softly. "Let's just say I've been expecting you." Ethan blinked, confused. "Expecting me? But we've never met before?" The man smiled knowingly, as if sharing a secret only he understood. Names aren't always necessary when meeting someone important. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden cross no bigger than Ethan's palm. Its surface was smooth, worn down by years of handling. "This is for you," he said, placing it gently in Ethan's hand. Ethan stared at the cross, feeling its weight in his palm. "Why are you giving this to me?" The man leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Because you'll need it soon. And remember this. Some secrets can't stay hidden forever. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. What do you mean? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. But the man didn't answer. Instead, he gave Ethan a long, thoughtful look before leaning back and closing his eyes as if their conversation was over. Ethan sat there for a moment, clutching the cross tightly, unsure what to say or do next. The man's words echoed in his mind, leaving him unsettled. Finally, he stood up, backing away slowly. "Thank you," he mumbled, though he wasn't sure why he was thanking him. As he turned to leave, he glanced back one last time. The man hadn't moved. He still sat there, perfectly still, bathed in the glow of the candles. When Ethan stepped back into the main hallway, Sarah was waiting for him, her arms crossed and a worried expression on her face. "There you are," she said, exhaling sharply. "I was starting to get worried." "I'm sorry," Ethan murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. He clutched the cross tightly in his fist, his heart racing. Something about the encounter had left him shaken, though he couldn't quite explain why. Sarah frowned, noticing how pale he looked. "Are you all right? You seem different." Ethan nodded quickly, avoiding her eyes. He didn't want to talk about the man or the cross. Not yet. All he knew was that something strange had happened, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the day was far from over. The walk home felt longer than usual, though the distance hadn't changed. Ethan walked beside his mother in silence, his small hand gripping hers tightly. The wooden cross was still clutched in his other hand, hidden from view but weighing heavily on his mind. His thoughts raced, replaying every word the elderly man had said. Who was he? Why had he given Ethan the cross? And what did he mean by "some secrets can't stay hidden forever"? Sarah noticed her son's quiet demeanor and squeezed his hand gently. "Ethan, are you sure you're okay? You've been awfully quiet." Ethan nodded quickly, avoiding her gaze. "I'm fine," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. He wanted to tell her about the man, about the strange feeling that had settled in his chest, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he stared at the ground as they walked, kicking at pebbles along the path. The autumn breeze picked up, rustling the leaves overhead and sending a chill through the air. Ethan shivered, pulling his jacket tighter around himself. He couldn't shake the sensation that they were being watched. Every time he glanced over his shoulder, he expected to see someone or something following them. But the street behind them was empty, lined with quiet houses and swaying trees. "Did anything happen in the chapel?" Sarah asked finally, breaking the silence. Her tone was gentle, but there was an edge of concern she couldn't hide. "You seemed distracted when I found you." Ethan hesitated, chewing on his lower lip. For a moment he considered telling her everything, the man, the cross, the cryptic warning, but something stopped him. It wasn't fear exactly, but more like an instinct telling him to keep it to himself for now. "Nothing happened." He lied, his voice barely audible. Sarah frowned, unconvinced. She knew her son well enough to recognize when something was bothering him. "Ethan, you know you can talk to me, right? If something's wrong, I want to help." Ethan nodded again, but his grip on the cross tightened. He didn't respond, his mind swirling with questions he couldn't answer. What if the man had been right? What if there really was a secret, something important that Ethan didn't understand yet? When they finally reached their house, Sarah unlocked the door and ushered Ethan inside. The warmth of the living room was a welcome contrast to the cool air outside, but Ethan didn't feel any less uneasy. He sat down on the couch, staring at the floor, while Sarah busied herself making tea. She returned a few minutes later, setting a steaming mug on the coffee table before sitting beside him. "Ethan," she began softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Please tell me what's going on, you're scaring me." For a long moment, Ethan didn't say anything. Then, without looking up, he leaned closer to his mother and whispered 4 chilling words. "He knows our secret." Sarah froze, her eyes widening in shock. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she couldn't speak. What did you say? She stammered, her voice trembling. Ethan looked up at her then, his young face pale and serious. That's what... The man told me. He said some secrets can't stay hidden forever. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, memories flooding back like a storm she thought she'd left behind years ago. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. All she could do was stare at her son, her mind racing with questions and fears she had tried so hard to bury. Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of panic and confusion. The words Ethan had whispered, "He knows our secret," echoed in her head, louder than any sound in the quiet room. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the couch, her knuckles turning white. For years, she had buried that part of her life so deep that even thinking about it felt like opening a door to a nightmare. But now those 4 simple words from her son threatened to pull everything into the light. "Ethan," Sarah said finally, her voice shaky but firm. "Tell me exactly what happened. Who is he? What did this man say to you?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably on the couch, his small frame tense. He hesitated before speaking, clutching the wooden cross tightly in his hand. "I don't know who he is. I've never seen him before. He was sitting in the side chapel and he just knew my name. He gave me this." He held up the cross, his fingers brushing against its smooth surface. And then he said some secrets can't stay hidden forever. Sarah stared at the cross, her stomach twisting into knots. It looked ordinary enough, a small, unremarkable piece of wood, but something about it sent a chill through her. She reached out instinctively, wanting to take it from Ethan, but stopped herself. Instead, she focused on her son, forcing herself to stay calm for his sake. "Did he say anything else?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Anything about me?" Ethan shook his head. "No, just that. But Mom..." His voice trailed off, and he looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes. How could he know? How does anyone know? Sarah didn't answer right away. She leaned back against the couch, her thoughts spiraling. Years ago, during one of the darkest times of her life, she had made a desperate choice, a prayer whispered into the night, a plea for help when she felt utterly alone. At the time, she thought no one had heard her. But then strange things began happening. Doors opening on their own, whispers in empty rooms, shadows moving where there should have been none. She convinced herself it was all in her head, or maybe just coincidence. But deep down, she always wondered if something, or someone, had answered her call. Now, staring at her son, she couldn't ignore the sinking feeling that whatever force she had unknowingly invited into their lives was still lurking nearby, and somehow Ethan had crossed paths with it. "Mom?" Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts. "Are we in trouble?" Sarah blinked, pulling herself back to the present. She forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "No, sweetheart. We're not in trouble, but I need you to tell me everything you remember about that man. Every little detail, okay?" Ethan nodded slowly, beginning to describe the encounter again. The man's kind face, his calm demeanor, the way he seemed to know things he shouldn't. As he spoke, Sarah listened intently, piecing together fragments of information. There was something familiar about the story, though she couldn't quite place it. Had she ever seen the man before? Or was this something new entirely? When Ethan finished, Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. "All right, here's what we're going to do," she said firmly. "We'll go back to the church tomorrow. Maybe Pastor Daniels knows who this man is. If anyone can help us figure this out, it's him." Ethan nodded again, though he still looked uneasy. "Do you think the man will be there?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But we have to try. Until then, don't worry about it, okay? Just stay close to me." As Ethan agreed reluctantly, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the answers they sought wouldn't come easily, and that uncovering the truth might bring consequences neither of them was prepared for. That night, sleep eluded both Sarah and Ethan. The house, usually a place of comfort and safety, now felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Every creak of the floorboards or rustle of leaves outside sent their nerves on edge. Ethan lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, his fingers wrapped tightly around the wooden cross. He could hear his mother moving around in her room down the hall, soft footsteps pacing back and forth, the occasional sigh breaking the silence. At one point, Ethan got out of bed and tiptoed to his doorway, peeking into the hallway. He saw Sarah sitting on the edge of her bed, her face illuminated by the faint glow of a bedside lamp. She had an old journal open in her lap, its pages yellowed with age. Her brow was furrowed as she flipped through it, pausing occasionally to read something more closely. Ethan wanted to ask what she was doing, but he didn't dare interrupt her. Instead, he crept back to his room, clutching the cross even tighter as midnight approached. The electricity flickered unexpectedly, plunging the house into darkness. Ethan gasped, sitting upright in his bed. His heart raced as he fumbled for the flashlight he kept under his pillow. When he switched it on, the narrow beam of light revealed nothing unusual, but that didn't stop the unease from creeping over him. He called out softly, "Mom!" "I'm here," Sarah replied, her voice calm but strained. A moment later, she appeared in the doorway, holding a candle. Its warm light cast flickering shadows across the walls, making the room feel alive with movement. "It's okay, Ethan, just a power outage." But Ethan wasn't convinced. "Do you think it's because of him?" he asked hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah hesitated, unsure how to respond. She knelt beside his bed, placing the candle carefully on the nightstand. "I don't know, sweetheart. But we're safe here. Nothing can hurt us." Ethan nodded, though his eyes darted nervously toward the window. The curtains fluttered slightly, disturbed by a breeze sneaking through a crack. For a moment, everything seemed normal. But then Ethan froze, his breath catching in his throat. There, beyond the glass, stood a shadowy figure. It wasn't clear enough to make out any details, just a silhouette outlined against the moonlight. It was tall and still, watching them. "Mom!" Ethan whispered urgently, pointing toward the window. Sarah turned quickly, her eyes widening as she spotted the figure too. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to stay composed. "Stay here," she instructed firmly, rising to her feet. She grabbed the candle and cautiously approached the window, pulling back the curtain to get a better look. By the time she reached it, the figure was gone, leaving only the empty yard bathed in silver moonlight. "It's all right," Sarah said, turning back to Ethan, though her voice wavered slightly. "There's no one there now." But Ethan wasn't reassured. What if it comes back? What if it knows where we live? Sarah returned to his side, sitting on the edge of the bed. She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, trying to steady her own nerves as much as his. "Listen to me," she said gently. "Whatever is happening, we'll face it together. You're not alone, okay?" Ethan nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "Why is this happening, Mom? Why did that man give me the cross?" Sarah sighed, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I don't have all the answers yet, but I promise we'll find out. Tomorrow we'll go back to the church and talk to Pastor Daniels. Maybe he can help us understand." For a while, they sat together in silence, the candlelight casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Eventually, Ethan drifted off to sleep, exhaustion overtaking his fear. Sarah stayed by his side, keeping watch until the first rays of dawn broke through the darkness. As the sun rose, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, she allowed herself a small measure of hope. Whatever secrets were lurking in the shadows, she vowed to protect her son and uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The next morning, Sarah and Ethan returned to St. Mary's Chapel, their steps heavy with unease. The cheerful chatter of other parishioners filled the air as families gathered outside, but neither Sarah nor Ethan felt any of that warmth. Instead, they clung to each other, scanning the crowd for any sign of the mysterious man from the day before. "Stay close to me," Sarah whispered, her voice firm yet tinged with worry. Ethan nodded silently, his small hand gripping hers tightly. Together they approached Pastor Daniels, who stood near the entrance greeting visitors. His kind smile faltered slightly when he noticed the tension on their faces. "Sarah, Ethan, good to see you both again," the pastor said warmly. "Is everything all right?" Sarah hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one else was listening. "Pastor, we need your help. Do you know of anyone unusual who might have been here yesterday? An older man, maybe someone who doesn't normally attend services?" Pastor Daniels frowned, clearly puzzled. "Unusual, not that I recall. We had our regular attendees yesterday and a few visitors, but nothing out of the ordinary." He paused, studying their expressions. "Why do you ask? Has something happened?" Ethan looked up at his mother, unsure if he should speak. Sarah took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. Ethan met someone in the side chapel after the service, a man who seemed to know him, even though they'd never met before. He gave Ethan this. She gestured toward the wooden cross still clutched in Ethan's hand. "And he said some things that, well, they've left us unsettled." The pastor's brow furrowed further. "A man who knew Ethan? That does sound strange. Can you describe him?" Ethan spoke up then, his voice soft but steady. "He was old, with silver hair and kind eyes. He wore a big coat and he sat alone in the chapel. He told me—" Ethan hesitated, glancing at his mother before continuing. "He told me some secrets can't stay hidden forever." Pastor Daniels grew quiet, his expression thoughtful. After a moment, he shook his head. "I'm sorry, but I don't recognize anyone matching that description. It's possible he was just a visitor passing through town. Still, I'll keep an eye out and let you know if I hear anything." Though disappointed, Sarah thanked him and led Ethan back toward the parking lot. As they walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. Her mind kept drifting back to the journal she had read the night before, the one where she documented the strange events that followed her desperate prayer years ago. She realized now that those events hadn't stopped. They had simply faded into the background, waiting for the right moment to resurface. When they got home, Sarah retrieved the journal from her room and sat down with Ethan at the kitchen table. "There are things I haven't told you," she began gently, opening the journal to the first page. "Things I thought were over, but maybe they're not." She explained how, during a difficult time in her life, she had prayed for guidance, and how, soon after, unexplainable things started happening. Doors would open on their own, whispers echoed in empty rooms, and shadows moved without cause. At the time, she convinced herself it was all coincidence or stress. But now, looking at the pattern written plainly in her journal, she saw how closely it aligned with Ethan's recent experiences. Ethan listened intently, his wide eyes reflecting a mix of fear and curiosity. "Do you think the man is connected to what happened to you?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But I think it's time we faced whatever this is. If there's a way to stop it or understand it, we need to try." Together, they pored over the journal, searching for clues. By the end of the day, Sarah felt more determined than ever. Whatever force she had unknowingly invited into their lives wasn't going to disappear on its own. And if protecting Ethan meant confronting her past, then so be it. That evening, Sarah decided it was time to take action. Sitting at the kitchen table with Ethan, she explained her plan in simple terms. "We need to make peace with whatever is here," she said gently. "I think this all started because of something I did a long time ago. If I can fix it, maybe things will go back to normal." Ethan nodded slowly, though his eyes were wide with apprehension. "What do we have to do?" Sarah smiled reassuringly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll say a prayer together, a special one. It's about asking for forgiveness and protection. And don't worry, I'll be right beside you every step of the way." Using the journal as a guide, Sarah wrote out a heartfelt prayer. She included words of repentance for the choices she regretted and pleas for safety for her family. When she finished, she folded the paper neatly and placed it in the center of the table. "We'll light a candle and read this aloud tonight," she told Ethan. "It's just like going to church, but quieter." As dusk settled over the house, they gathered in the living room. The atmosphere felt heavy, charged with anticipation. Sarah lit a single white candle and handed Ethan the wooden cross he had been carrying since the day before. "Hold on to this tightly," she instructed softly. "It might help remind us that we're not alone." Standing side by side, they began reciting the prayer, their voices blending together in a quiet harmony. At first, the words felt awkward, weighted with emotion neither of them fully understood. But as they continued, a sense of calm washed over them, replacing the fear that had gripped their hearts for days. By the time they reached the final line, "Protect our home and fill it with your light," the room seemed brighter, warmer, as if an invisible weight had lifted. For a moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly the flickering candle flame grew steadier, burning with a steady glow that filled the room with soft golden light. Ethan glanced up at his mother, his lips curving into a tentative smile. "Do you think it worked?" he whispered. "I think so," Sarah replied, her voice thick with relief. She hugged him close, feeling tears well up in her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of gratitude. Whatever force had lingered in their lives seemed to retreat now, leaving only quiet stillness behind. Over the next few days, life began returning to normal, or as close to normal as it could be. The strange noises stopped, the shadows stayed put, and Ethan slept soundly through the night without waking in fear. Yet, even as things improved, Sarah couldn't forget the lesson she had learned. Some secrets may never fully disappear, but acknowledging them is the first step toward healing. One afternoon, while cleaning out the attic, Sarah came across the wooden cross Ethan had left on his dresser. Curious, she picked it up, running her fingers over its smooth surface. It was such a simple object, yet it carried so much meaning. As she set it aside, she noticed something etched faintly on the back, a tiny inscription she hadn't seen before. Squinting, she read the faded letters, "Faith protects." Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she stood frozen, staring at the words. Then, smiling softly, she tucked the cross safely away in a drawer, vowing to keep it as a reminder, for herself and for Ethan, that faith, honesty, and love could overcome even the darkest fears. Though the experience left scars, they would carry forever. Sarah knew one thing for certain: she would always protect her son and face the truth no matter how hard it might be.